to get started, Susan Pitzele.
Well, almost the first thing that people say when they get up here is, I've been drawing my whole life. And I want you to know I have not been drawing my whole life. I had coloring books. Last year, right? 3 years ago. I had coloring books, and I learned all the rules about how to color inside the lines, all the lines going in the same direction, very light. I never had a sketch pad as a kid. I had crayons and a coloring book. My parents didn't have much money, they had no sophistication, they didn't know anything about art, and I was interested in art, but that was it, you know, it just like was one of the things I was interested in. So I tried, occasionally I would try to draw something, and I would have these like little stick figures like kids do, and I knew I couldn't draw. So I knew I couldn't be an artist, and I knew I wasn't creative. And I knew that for a long time, and it really got in my way. So I've made a bunch of notes so that I remember what I want to tell you. I did one drawing that I can remember when I was a kid. I was around 6 or 7. And it was a copy of a birthday card that had a rose with a little drop of dew on the petal. And I copied it, and I was really proud of it. And I showed it to this boy who I really liked in school, and he tore it up. And I think it was my last drawing, and I don't remember anything before it, so it may have been my first drawing as well.
What did you do? Slap him in the face?
Oh no, I went home crying. I was a very quiet kind of little girl that followed the rules. So anyhow, that was my childhood art experience. I never had any exposure to museums or art books or anything until I was 18. It was the first time I went to a museum. But I was always interested in art in some way. Like I had friends who took lessons, and I wished that I could have taken lessons. I always had friends who were artists. All my friends were artists. Kind of all my best friends seemed to be artists. And they always said, oh, you're an artist, you just don't know what your medium is yet. But I knew I couldn't draw, so I couldn't be an artist. And that was kind of the theme, you know, for me. And, okay, so that brings me up to, oh, I had a lot of beliefs about what artists are. I wrote these down. Artists draw all the time. They draw really well from the start, and they never erase, because that's cheating. And artists are driven to draw all the time, and they can draw. And I couldn't do any of those, so I knew I wasn't an artist. And I'll tell you, these beliefs followed me my whole life up until about 6 years ago. Over the years, I knitted, I weaved, I did all of the female craft things. I renovated houses.
Birthday cakes?
Birthday cakes. I made custom birthday cakes for people. You know, if I knew someone who was a backpacker, I would make a little cake with a little tent and a little lake, and I made these incredible birthday cakes that were custom made. But that was, you know, I never thought I was an artist, you know. So, okay, so I'm way ahead of where I thought I'd be at this point. So 20 years ago, I went on a vision quest. I don't know if you know what that is. I knew I was a psychotherapist because my first husband was a psychiatrist and he wanted me to work with him. And so I became a psychotherapist, and I was doing it and I was good at it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I knew that, but I didn't know what I did want to do. I knew that I'd always enjoyed doing things with my hands, like the knitting and the weaving and all that stuff. So I went on a vision quest, and when I got off the airplane and I walked over to the people who were meeting me, one of the women said, "Are you a potter?" And I said, "No."
What?
Potter. I said, "No." I got to the place where the vision quest was happening, and there was a potter there. And she said, and I told her that this had just happened, and she said, "Take off your sunglasses." And she looked at me, she said, "Oh, you're a potter." I thought, this is a strange vision quest. It hasn't started. Twice I've been told I'm a potter. So we went off into the mountains of southern Colorado for 3 days with no food and just water alone. And to get our vision. And people saw bears, and people saw eagles, and people had all these incredible experiences. And what I had was a lot of little beetles that went through my campsite, and they all looked like the southwestern pottery. You know the way that stuff's painted? That's what they look like. And I said, "Oh my God, it's like, that's the third time this pottery came up. So that must be it." So I came home from the vision quest, and I looked for someone to take lessons from. And the first person I called only had classes on the day I couldn't go, so I called someone else. And she was a production potter. She taught me how to throw pots, and I became very good at throwing pots. And I love the feeling of the clay in my hands and the wheel going around. But I got really bored with making functional pottery. It's like, didn't go anywhere for me. And I subscribed to Ceramic Monthly magazine, and I was flipping through that, and I saw these ceramic things that were just gorgeous. And I thought, oh, I'd love to make things like that. And I looked at the name, and it was Siglinda Scarpa, and she was the first person I called whose class I couldn't take because it was on the wrong day. So I rearranged my schedule, and I started taking classes from her. And what I liked about her work was that it was very organic, and this is sort of reminiscent of the sort of thing that she did and that I was doing for quite a while. And I just start with a handful of clay and then just see where it went. I never knew what I was going to do when I started. It just evolved. So this was the first kind of thing I was doing, and I've got a lot of pieces of this type.
Did you press that out like pasta?
No, I did it all with my hands.
It looks like coral reef.
It started with, it started with a lump of clay, and I just started working it until...
And of course you had to keep it wet so it wouldn't break off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like a seashell.
Yes, it
It
does.
looks like something underwater.
Yeah.
Now her work, my work is more delicate than her work. She made these kinds of edges and showed me how to do it, but hers were much thicker, and mine are very, very thin. All my pots were very thin, and if I had a problem with my functional pottery, it was that I made it so thin that it would not support itself. But right from the beginning, I didn't make those thick beginner pots. I was always very fine.
And it didn't break in the kiln. You did fire it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, these are all fired. So then I liked throwing a lot, so I learned how to throw a donut shape that was hollow inside, and then cut it open and make it into something else. And this is a piece that started out that way. It started out as a donut shape that I cut open and then altered. And I hang it different ways. I can't even remember how I hang it. I think I hang it this way.
On a nail.
Yeah, on a nail. Yeah.
So it's different then. It's a new piece each time.
And I have several of this sort of thing that I was very interested in the different glazes and different textures. I never liked the shiny glazes and things that look like glazes. I always liked the more natural look.
That's pretty.
So, one year I was on vacation in Cozumel for a long time, and I had, because I couldn't draw and didn't have a sketchbook because I couldn't draw, and I only could work with my hands this way, I made paper mache. And I didn't know if it was possible to do this with paper mache. But I did these made out of paper mache and just set them in the sun to dry, and then painted them. Yeah. Yeah.
And you did them the same way that you did
The same way I did the clay. Yeah, I just made the paper mache, and when it got, I had to let it dry out until it got to a consistency that I could work with it.
Newspaper and flour.
Newspaper, flour, and water.
Mexican newspaper.
You look like,
So pretty.
Yeah. Yeah.
They look like they're heavy though, I mean.
Yeah, they do, but they're light as a feather.
Paper mache.
Yeah. So this is another piece that I made. This is the
Maze?
this is the Labyrinth at Chartres, I think, mostly.
Where?
Chartres Cathedral in France.
Oh.
So I threw this on the wheel to make this flat disc. And then I made what I call snakes, you know, little things like this, to make all of the little divisions. And then attach them to the disc. So it was a huge meditation to make this. And a bit confusing because it was easy to lose my place. But,
Get lost in the maze.
and this I glazed with the glazes that I used for some of my functional work. Because it was fairly early on when I did this. So I had quite a wonderful studio in my home, and then we moved to Fire Island. And when we moved to Fire Island, I didn't have a studio. We rented a house that had a wood stove, so I made little teeny pots like this. They were kind of this, not the delicate edge, but more of a smooth edge. And so I could fit them underneath the wood and fire them in the wood. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I did a lot of on Fire Island was I saw these shells that looked to me like screaming faces. And I would collect them when I was walking the beach, and then I'd come home and I'd use Fimo to make little eyes and a little mouth. And I made a whole bunch of these. And I also made this piece at the same time. And this I fired in the wood stove.
Is that Fimo?
No, this is real clay. But this fit underneath. This was as big a thing as I could make. And fire it in the fireplace. And after a while, I began to realize that everything I was making was screaming. And that I really was not very happy living on Fire Island. It took me quite a while before I noticed. And I find that that's sometimes the case, is that I'll make something and then I will notice how it's a reflection of what's going on inside me, and I'll learn from what I made about myself. So this was a really significant piece for me because I finally figured out I wasn't happy. So I created a studio in a friend's garage in Brightwaters, and I had a new beginning as a clay artist. And by then, I kind of could call myself a clay artist. I still couldn't draw, so I wasn't a real artist. I was a clay artist. And I started making eggs because it was fun to throw an egg form and have it close up. And it was a challenge of throwing to be able to make that. And that was fun. And then the bases were too light, and they weren't really supporting the egg, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I need more of a base if I want to be able to get out of this egg that I'm in. So I made a whole series of egg shapes with legs, and the legs got more and more stable. And this is one of the later ones where the support is actually in proportion to the egg shape, and the egg is now opening and I'm coming out. So that was what, series was what I was working on when 9/11 happened. And I couldn't do my eggs for a while. I couldn't get back into that feeling for a while, so I started making some pieces that were my 9/11 pieces. And this is the last one of that series that I did. Most of them were much smaller. And the first one had, you can tell that I like to work with my hands. The first one had, the surface had all these little marks on it, all these little indentations on it, and it was like the paper fluttering down. I didn't do that with the later ones, but then I made them different heights, and I have several of these that sit together in our living room, and they just remind me of the towers. So then I finally said, you know, I can't do this Fire Island thing anymore. Even with having a studio in Brightwaters, it's not working for me. So I decided I was going to buy a house in Bayshore, a two-family house, so I could live downstairs and have a studio, and I could rent out the upstairs so they could pay for my mortgage. And my husband Peter didn't want to leave Fire Island because he loved it. So he came over for the night, and he stayed. And he stayed a second night. And pretty soon he said, let's not rent out the upstairs. And he just kind of never went back to Fire Island. And I never went back to Fire Island. And eventually we sold the house there. And we're just much happier in Bayshore. So I had set up my studio in Bayshore. That was the first thing I did so I could get back into working with clay again after the interruption. And a neighbor came over and asked me if I could make a crucifix for her mother. She was a Mexican woman. And I've always had a hard time relating to the crucifixion, but not to Jesus. So I started working on a crucifix, and this is what I made. And to me, this is the thing I'm most proud of that I've done in my life. And to me, it represents it's like a tree trunk and tree limbs going out. So it's like the living Jesus, not the crucified Jesus. And I noticed when I was done that the trunk of his body was sort of out of proportion, but I thought, well, if you were hanging on a cross, your trunk would be out of proportion, so that's okay. And it's kind of realistic. And I really love this piece. And my neighbor came over to look at it, and I knew that there was no way she was going to get it, because I was too attached to it. And she took one look at it, and I knew she was trying to find out how to say to me that she didn't want it. So, because this was not going to be what a Mexican lady was going to think of as a crucifix, and she didn't want it for her mother. So I was very lucky, and I got to keep it without any problems.
Did you end up making something for her, or?
No, I didn't. I just couldn't make what it was she wanted.
She will make a piñata.
Yeah. So by then we knew we were going to stay in Bayshore, and I started renovating the house and putting in a huge garden in the backyard because we needed something beautiful, because 2nd Avenue in Bayshore is not beautiful. And between the renovation and the gardening and the clay, I just felt like you said, Terry, it just wasn't enough time to go in and prepare the clay and work with the clay and clean up from the clay. I needed at least half a day to make it worth my while, because it was so labor intensive. And I finally said, you know, I can't do this anymore. I gotta do something else. And I think it was right around that time that I met Roseanne. I was going into a workshop about how the mind works, in New York City, and it was a rainy day, and I had on these boots, my Mary Mecca boots. And Roseanne said, those are great. She was sitting across from me on the train, and she said, what great boots, where did you get those? And we started talking, and I saw that she had a portfolio with her, and, you know, artist materials, so I was like, artist, a real artist, not a clay artist. And so we started talking. She told me about wet paints, and I was very excited about that. And I got to the workshop, and they were talking about the two sides of the brain and how they work. And the man who was teaching the course started talking about this book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and how this woman took kids who couldn't draw, and in a very short time had them drawing. And he held up the book and he showed us all the pictures the kids had done, and I went right home and bought the book. And I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but one of the first things that she has you do is draw upside down.
Yeah.
So I sat down and I started drawing upside down. I, you know, understood the difference between the right brain and the left brain, and I started drawing. And when I turned the drawing right side up, I just burst into tears, because it just was a beautiful drawing. And I had been so sure my whole life that I couldn't draw. And I went, how is that possible? You know, I just read this book and now I can draw? No. Or I can learn to draw. So I called the Islip Art Museum, and they had a beginning drawing and painting class, which I signed up for immediately. I was all excited, and then there weren't enough people signed up, so it fell through. But I wasn't going to give up, and there was an Asian brush painting class. And I thought, well, that's very advanced. You know, that's for people who really know a lot about art, because to be able to make a painting simple, you have to really understand a lot. So I can't take that because that's for advanced people. But some other part of me said, it didn't say that. It didn't say you have to be experienced. So I signed up. And I did Asian brush painting for a while. So this is one of my Asian brush paintings, which is a typical theme that you do in that. Grapes, grape arbor. And this was a calligraphy that I was practicing calligraphy to make one of those big scrolls. So this is what was going to be on the scroll, these big figures. But then there was the year of the dog, or the year of the whatever it was, and a couple of other things that had to go on the scroll that I needed to practice. So I just practiced in all the spaces. And Peter came home and said, wow, that's great. That's so much more interesting than the scroll itself. So I just, I've kept it and I hang it up in my studio. So it's an example of typical calligraphy done in an unusual way. Then I switched to another teacher, and she did very bold, a lot of very bold black and white kind of things. And in Asian brush painting, what you do is you copy your teacher's paintings. She'll put up paintings and then you just copy it. That's how you learn. So I copied this, you know, 3 or 4 times, and I didn't like any of the copies, and they were sitting on top of each other in my studio. And I walked in one day and I went, that's great. So I mounted one painting on top of the other painting, and it came out with all this depth. And some of the people I knew said, you can do that? You're allowed to do that? Mount 2 paintings together? I said, oh, I did it. It worked. So I felt like I was kind of breaking out a little bit into being my own person a little more with that one, a little more creative. And then this one I brought. I put it in the show once, I think. I'm not sure. I put it somewhere in the show. This came, I'd done a belly dancing workshop. and I came home and I did this painting, because we learned how to do that Sufi spinning, which is a wonderful meditation. And so I came home and this was what came out of my learning how to do that whirling. So this was kind of like the progression here, where I started out doing the same thing as my teacher and wound up finding my own voice a little more. And this feels more like my own voice. But I now knew that it was possible to learn how to draw, even though I knew I couldn't. And I've been coming here occasionally, not very often, but occasionally. And so I was reading the Artly calendar, and they had a traditional still life drawing and painting class, the Stevenson Academy. And what they do is they teach you how to do a full charcoal rendering of a still life, and then you do the same still life in oil paint. So you're working for months with the same still life. And I really learned a lot about values by doing the charcoal, and then I learned about hue and chroma and all that stuff doing the oils. And this was my first oil painting ever in my life. She's a great teacher. I mean, it took a long time because, you know, you've got a class that you go to, you have to set the still life up, which takes like half an hour at this point. The one I'm doing now takes 45 minutes. So you set the thing up and you work on it, and you know, it takes a long time. But that was my first. You've seen that before, but
Yes.
I want to bring it because it was my first.
It is.
Yeah. So, so the first project is this. It's pottery and the 3 pieces of fruit. That's standard first still life. The second one is glass, and I brought in the glass, both the drawing and the painting here before. And I learned a lot doing the glass, and I learned to see so much doing it. It's like, I look at it and I say, that wasn't there last week, but it had to have been there last week. You know, it's just that my seeing was getting better. You know, I was seeing more and more. So the third project is metal. And while I was doing a drawing in class, I was also doing one at home in my studio to practice. So these are my 2 metal drawings. This is the one that I did at home. This is a piece of my pottery. That's the backdrop for the pot. And this is silver. And this is the one that I did in class. And the fabric is red. It's basically alizarin crimson with a tiny bit of blue in it, and that's the basic color. And boy, is that a pain in the neck now that I'm doing the oil. I'm just like, I said today, I know why Van Gogh killed himself. He was working with alizarin crimson. But this is a pot that I made with a metallic glaze, so I thought that went with the theme of metal. And this is, you know, the main thing. And this was a duller, more not bronzy kind of color. And this is, it said silver on the bottom, but it looks like stainless steel to me, and it doesn't tarnish, so it's not silver. So that's my most recent full rendering that I did in class. In between the glass and this, she said, let's take a break and do some fast paintings that you can do in 2 sessions instead of 2 or 3 months. So this is one of my fast paintings that I did in 2 classes from a photograph. Yeah. And I lived in Alaska, so it had a lot of meaning for me because I used to spend a lot of time.
I've never seen
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of 2 fast paintings I've done. Fast relative to these. The other thing that I started doing was going to the Wednesday morning group, watercolor group at the Bayshore Library, but I'm not doing watercolors. I'm copying other people's portraits in charcoal, and this is the latest one I did, which I was very proud of, and everyone said was really good, and I took it into my teacher, and she looked at it and she said, "The angle of the eyes and the mouth are off." I mean, she looked at it and she said it like that. She saw it, and I had been working on it for 2 or 3 weeks and hadn't seen it. And she told me the first thing you want to do is establish where the angle of the eyes and the mouth before you do it, before you start actually drawing.
And you didn't turn it upside down.
I didn't. No, I didn't.
It's a mirror.
I didn't. It's like I know that, but I didn't think of it. But anyhow, I'm still pretty proud of it, and I think it's,
Great.
nice way to learn.
Fabric is terrific.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
thank you. Yeah. It's easier working from a photograph, boy,
Yes.
than from life.
It takes time.
So, like I said, this is what I'm working on now in oil. I've got this all set up to work on. I've got the canvas prepped with it, but I haven't started this one yet. But I've started this one, and I'm just working on the background at this point, and I'm almost done with the background. So that's. So 6 years ago, maybe, I met Roseanne and came here and learned that I could learn to draw, and all this stuff has been since then. And I think my first love is really clay, but as I get older, it's just too labor intensive. But it gives me a good feeling for painting. And I've discovered that it's easier to draw something that I've made in clay than anything else. It's like I can draw it like that if I have created it in clay.
You know the dimensions.
Yeah, I have it in me in a way that I don't. Yeah, yeah. But anyhow, the way I wanted to end is that when I was working on this, we're going to have to stop for the summer. And I will have completed the background. Maybe I'll have completed this, maybe not. But then the paint's going to be drying all summer long. And so I said, and then we're going on a trip in the fall, and I said, maybe I shouldn't even start the 3 pieces in this until I'm done with all the traveling and interruptions. And I asked my teacher what I could do, and maybe do some cast drawings or something. And she said, "Oh, you've got drawing down. You don't need to do that." It's like my whole life I couldn't draw. Yeah, so that's it. That's all I have to tell.
Anyone have questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah.
Have you, as a psychotherapist, do you see the similarity between the base of the eggshell and the base of the crucifix?
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah, this was definitely, this definitely gave me the idea to do this way. Yeah, yeah.
Does that taller one represent the twisted beams?
Well, it's not that literal, but it's sort of the feeling of it. Yes, it's the feeling of it.
Yeah.
And all the smaller ones are all different, and they're at different heights.
Flame. It's like a flame.
Yeah, it does. Most everything I did in clay had a very kind of organic thing.
There's no armature to that? There's no armature? There's no
No.
support?
No.
How do you get it so delicate without it collapsing?
It's solid. I looked to see if it was solid. It's solid. I started with a big chunk of clay, which I wedged and rolled into kind of a log shape and let it get leather hard. And then I carved it out.
Oh,
Okay.
wasn't wet.
No, it wasn't oil wet. It was like, it was leather hard, and I carved it, and then I smoothed it, you know, I wet it to smooth the edges. But that was carved.
But it's amazing, like Larry said, it didn't collapse on it.
No. No, it's pretty sturdy.
Do you have your own kiln?
I did, but I gave everything away.
Really? Now where do you go to a commercial, small pottery?
I haven't been working in clay since I gave everything away. I've only been doing the
Oh, you
Asian
stopped.
brush painting and then this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you
There
plan to do next?
I don't know. I'm kind of interested in portraits. I've done a couple in charcoal. And my question to you, Terry, about is it harder for you to do people you know? I find it much harder to do people I know than people I don't know. Because there's something that I know about them that is hard to capture maybe. I did one of Peter that I brought in that's, most people, maybe not you, but most people would say it looks exactly like you, but you and I would know it didn't. And it took me months to figure out what it was. Everyone who looked at it said, maybe the face is a little wide, or maybe the nose is a little long. It looks just like him. It's just a little bit off. And after about 2 or 3 months of it hanging on the wall, I realized the problem was that I made his neck too long. It didn't have anything to do with his face. Yeah. Yeah. So, and
Who was that, Peter?
Peter. Yeah.
That was-
And I did, I also did one that I brought in of a Native American who, from here, from Long Island, who I saw in the drugstore. He had such an interesting face, and the way he was standing was so, I don't know, so Native American looking, and I didn't know anything about him. But I liked him, and I asked him if I could take his picture to do a drawing, and he said yes, and I did it, and it turned out really well. And I went back to the drugstore and said, do you know that guy's name? Because I'd like to give him the portrait. And they said, well, we know who he is, but we don't know his name. But if he ever comes in about 2 months ago, I did this maybe a year and a half ago. 2 months ago, they said, we got his name, we got his number. So, then I couldn't find the drawing. But I found it. I found it when I was looking for stuff to prepare. So now I'm going to call him and give it to him. So
Did you bring it with you tonight?
No, I didn't, and I did. I didn't think of it. I didn't
You should
think
have
of it.
taken a photo of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where I'm headed, because people are endlessly interesting, and they're everywhere. And I figure I'm going to wind up probably in an old folks' home with a lot of people who are sitting around and doing nothing else, so I'll have lots of subjects.
You can teach them.
That's right, she said,
You can teach them.
I can teach them.
Yeah, of course. Do you find yourself tending to psychoanalyze yourself when you're done or before you start?
Not before I start, not at all. But sometimes when I'm looking at what I've done, I go, huh, isn't that interesting? Like this one. I can't tell you how many little shells, screaming shells I made in this, and how long it was after I made them before I really saw them. And said, wow, I guess I'm not too happy.
Beautiful work.
Thank you.
Thank you.